that southeastern region of Ukraine, the Don Basin. That's why it's known as Donbass for short. Well, there's fighting in two particular regions, Donetsk region and Luhansk region. Both regions are named after their regional capital. So Russia already controlled about half of those regions prior to the war commencing, and now controls most of them. So Severodonetsk appears to be the vortex of the war right now, and the Russians are trying to envelop it. They're attacking it on three sides, and they recently destroyed an important bridge that the Ukrainians used to bring reinforcements forward and supplies, and the could retreat vehicles. You could build a pontoon bridge. You could bring road-on, road-off ferries, but all these things are a bit slower, quite difficult. Anyway, we saw what happened when the Russians tried to build their pontoon bridge, and they paid a very heavy price. Had dozens of vehicles destroyed or damaged. People are always talking about Russian morale collapsing, but only about 500 Russians have surrendered, so far as I know. So I think morale is not as terrible as we're led to believe. So always take. There's seldom outright lies, between Howard Ross, which he came up with, and there's also hybrid war, information warfare, and the Russians claim to be past masters of this, but they've really not controlled the media space in the West at all, or really got their narrative out in a significant way. Only in sort of white nationalist fringes or amongst some ultra-left groups does anybody buy the Kremlin's version of events. So it might be reported in the Western mainstream media, but without a great deal of respect or credulity. So that the Russian government has a richly deserved reputation for telling flagrant lies all the time and being the sworn enemy of free inquiry, which is why it's one of the most censorious countries in the world, why it's tried to rewrite the history books. It's attempting the erasure of the Ukrainian nation, figuratively as well as not necessarily going to kill all Ukrainians, but just have to lobotomize and criminalize the Ukrainians, make them believe that they're a sort of second-class Russian and so on. So the Russians are advancing in very small groups. It's a tactical level rather than strategic level, and just taking little bites out of Ukraine, trying to recruit reinforcements. Notably, they've raised the age. They can conscript people up to the age of 40. They forced a lot of men to go for medicals, to confirm conscript a lot more. Conscripts do 1 year military service, and they're something sent to the battlefront just to rush through basic training. They're going to have to do more and more of that. So they also send the Rosgvardia, which is really a type of police force. So they're going to have to recall to the colours people who've already done their military service. Conscripts are coming to the end of their 12-month in the army. We're going to have the honour of serving a bit longer because the losses are so high, and they've had a lot of assets destroyed, vehicles, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, and so on. And obviously, Russia can build more, but this is several years' worth of production, and they can step up production, but not that fast. They're obviously resorting to dumb munitions a lot more because they've expended almost all their smart bombs or their laser-guided missiles. And yes, they can manufacture more, but that takes time. It costs money. It's costing them $300 million a day, which is more than double what it was they're spending before the war. And it's rising. And they can afford this because their economy is a lot of the electronic components they use for their missiles and so on are made in the European Union or the United States. They're not going to be able to purchase those any longer. They can try and use Airsat's Chinese ones. We'll see how well that works. And so for years, Putin's mantra was, we must have technological independence, autarky, and he still hasn't achieved it, just like he hasn't diversified the economy, despite harping on and on and on about it. If he'd actually put money, time, and political will into that, into these wars of aggression, he might have achieved that. But he really didn't prepare. So, I think the Russians will eventually take Severodonetsk, but it'll be another Pyrrhic victory. They can attack elsewhere. I don't think they'll take Odessa. That's probably just too far. You know how bad the logistics are. The Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back in some sectors. I'm surprised that the Ukrainians don't try and cut where the Russians are or stage some sort of insurrection there, because there's a very large river, the Dnieper, just to the east of Kherson, and take those bridges, blow up those bridges or whatever, and then drive a wedge south from the Ukrainian-controlled territory, south of the Black Sea, cut off Kherson, and you'd eventually force something like 20,000 Russians to surrender. You could do the same to the Crimea or something like that. So, I mean, there's little sign that the Ukrainian will is flagging. There's a bit of this in Russia. A retired, very respected colonel openly criticizing the special military operation, saying it's so hack-handed, and they're fighting this war in a very haphazard manner. So they clearly weren't prepared. I mean, Gerasimov and Shoigu ought to be sacked, but I suppose Putin doesn't want to discomfort people, want to undermine morale even more. They told them they were ready. Then they needed an extra 8 days. They delayed the start of the war by 8 days. Then they went ahead, and it's far, far behind schedule. Remember, they thought they were going to take Kiev in 3 days, which is why they put out that broadcast saying, this is it, we made it, we've done it. Now we're uniting Belarus and Ukraine with Russia. They're going to hold referenda in Luhansk and Donbass, saying, you're independent countries now, but do you want to accede to the Russian Federation? And obviously they'll say yes. Russia's trying the same trick with the illegally occupied territories of Georgia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. They'd like to do so with Transnistria. And the war goes really well for the Ukrainians. I think Western countries might say, Ukraine, whilst you're there, would you mind kicking the Russians out of Transnistria, the illegally occupied area of Moldova? And the United Kingdom is talking about more arms for Moldova, which is a good idea in some ways, because partly it's a very poor country, Moldova, the poorest country in the European Union, are very dependent on Russian oil and gas. And the poorest country in Europe, Moldova is not in the European Union, though they aspire to join it. But there's a significant minority who are pro-Moscow. And this is the risk you run by arming Moldova, that some of those weapons could be turned against NATO and used by the Russians, because some people really are pro-Putin in that country. It's difficult to estimate because, of course, the pro-Russian sides being Putinites, they massively cheat in all elections. They've got absolutely no moral scruples at all. And they will flagrantly lie and false accuse their victims of the crimes that they themselves are committing. And Putin was always a gangster. In 1991, that was the biggest drug bust in Russian history. A ton of cocaine was busted. He was in charge of the operation, saying they're going to repurpose it for medical use, but that ton of cocaine vanished into thin air. I wonder what he did with it. That's a bit too much to go up even his snout. So they obviously will have sold it on the black market, and he will have made a killing. This is a country where you get like 6 years for possessing a gram of cannabis, never mind dealing it. So he has always been a gangster. He's always been a flagrant hypocrite. So the war's going to grind on for several months. Now, the new Western technology will begin to tell, but there's just really not enough of it. Germany going to get 15 tanks in July. 5 tanks, 15 out of hundreds. I mean, the Germans are hopefully never going to use their tanks. Give the Ukrainians the tanks now. They need tanks now, not like a lot more than that. I think every NATO country could easily give 10% of all their hardware to Ukraine. These NATO countries are not using it at the moment. They can obviously manufacture and purchase more, but Ukraine can't afford to purchase more and can't really manufacture more. They don't have much military manufacturing. They're being bombarded at the moment. Ukraine says it wants to build up its army to 1 million, which would actually outnumber the Russians. So it'd be great if they do. I'm just very worried there'll be a chemical attack or nuclear attack for Ukraine. You could give that's 35 million people, excluding those who fled, excluding those on Russian occupation. So I think the Russians will eventually take the whole of Donbass, maybe then be pushed out early next year. But increasingly, we're increasingly exhausted. And I think the Russians are beginning to consider negotiating. But the Ukrainians obviously feeling quite confident, which is why they're saying we'll never give away a millimeter of our territory. And I think Ukraine should at least be given European Union candidate status. And France saying that Ukraine might not be let in for 15 years, but at least give them candidate status as a morale boost, as a massive fuck you to Putin, to show that this war has failed and really backfired on him. Turkey going to veto Sweden and Finland joining the European Union because they let Kurdish nationalist groups exist there. Maybe the Turks can be persuaded to change their mind if they're offered something in return. They also don't want to damage their relationship with Russia, the Turks. They sold those Bayraktar drones to the Ukrainians, and Russia's not happy about that. Of course, Turkey doesn't want to lose out on millions of Russian tourists coming there every summer. But maybe Sweden and Finland might just have to expel those Kurdish nationalist groups. Anyway, the United States, the UK, and other countries, they could just all sign defense treaties with Sweden and Finland, and not, even if they don't actually let them into NATO. It could be bilateral or trilateral or whatever, and dispatch some US and British troops to the Finnish border with Russia. And that would do the trick, really. Thanks for watching. Bye.